So many years ago, I came to the conclusion that my mother is the queen of our TV remote control. As far as I can remember, when I was still living with my parents, every night of the week, the remote control would belong to her, and to her alone, because of one thing: soap operas. In my country, these shows are shown at night because they are the biggest crowd drawers. So I would remember coming home at the end of the day, and then once dinner is done, my mother would go off to the living room, and there for the next couple of hours would watch these shows. Sometimes I would be tempted to join her. The only problem with soap operas is that if you catch an episode in the middle of it, you will never understand what's going on. And if there's one thing I have learned about Asian dramas is that you are never guaranteed a predictable ending. So unless you go to the internet and watch the entire season, you'll never understand the whole plot on that one random episode that you have just seen. In our first reading today, Job presents a life story that can be considered a soap opera from the Old Testament. In the unfolding of this story, Job presents one of the most challenging theological questions of all times. Why does God, who is all good and powerful, allow for so much suffering in his creation? As a philosopher once said, if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-benevolent, then suffering should not have existed. We all know Job's story. God allowed the devil to take away everything from him. He is visited with every type of human suffering. What we hear today is his lament. Is not man's life on earth a drudgery? I've been assigned months of misery. There are a lot of people, me included, who read into this who can identify deeply with Job. All of us at different times and to some degree have endured some type of misery: pain, loss, loneliness, anxiety, depression, or maybe a combination. Job spoke what is in all of our hearts. What is God doing in the midst of all these? Why does God not act? This weekend, the church connects our first reading with our gospel story, which is at the beginning of the Gospel of Mark. We see Jesus bringing healing into the Jobs of his time, curing the sick and driving out many demons. Here we see Jesus surrounded by all who are suffering, and all are coming to him. Still the same question arises: what is God doing? What does God have to say about all these? In a later chapter in the book of Job, God answered Job's lamentation. He took Job on a tour of all the cosmos in all its mystery and then spoke to him. Were you there when I created the heavens and the earth? Were you there when I created the sky, the birds, the seas, and all the lands? God shows Job how little he understands of God's overall design and purpose. He reminds Job that his suffering is a tiny ingredient in God's larger plan. Imagine grabbing a very thick novel at the bookshop, and you happen to randomly open to a page in the middle of it. You see a paragraph in one of those pages, perhaps a part that is sad or complicated or violent. Would it be right to say this story makes no sense or has no purpose? Or would it not be more correct to say, I don't know how this dark or sad or violent scene fits into the overall plot of the book? And so the book of Job is saying to us that what we experience of it here and now is only a tiny scene. We are not in a position to say that this story has no meaning, that the suffering I'm going through has no purpose. We would not know until we see this through God's own perspective. Now let us again look at the gospel. People who are suffering are coming to Jesus because they saw in him what we have heard last week, that the power of God is in him. Jesus reaches out and heals them. He allowed his divine power to flow out into them. Here Jesus becomes a healer of the suffering of the world. But still, how does this make sense? Because as we can see, he did not heal everybody or delivered everyone from all illnesses and diseases. So what is he trying to do here? If we look closely, we see healing, but we also see something else. We see God's own solidarity with us who suffer. He does not simply say from a distance, "Trust me, I have a plan." Rather, in Jesus, God came to take on the agony of the human race, entering into our suffering and pain, all of it coming to its full expression on the cross. He enters into it with us and shows us his closeness. Yes, the lesson of Job remains. Trust in God, for there is a greater and bigger plan. The full story may not be revealed to us right now, and thus we are called in faith to embrace this mystery. We must trust in the Lord even when we cannot fully understand his ways, and even when it means enduring suffering. But we must hope, because we will never endure these things alone. In Jesus, we have the promise of God's healing power, and more than that, of his closeness to us in our suffering. I know that it is never easy to understand these experiences, and it is not my intention to downplay the consequences. But what we are asked to submit to is to have faith, and that is the key here, to encourage ourselves and one another, because faith leads to hope, and hope is what we need to continue our journey towards that ultimate freedom from all of these. Even though we will not have an answer today, we know that by trusting in God's providence, we will have the grace to journey through the mystery that is before us.